Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you for asking me. And you pronounced my name so well. Thank you. Okay, so first things first. I'm going to read two things of about equal length. And the first one of them is like apart from this memoir, I hate saying that I've been working on for like 6 years. And it just so happens, thanks to the miracle of Facebook, that David Utijian came down from northern New Jersey, and he knows exactly what I'm going to be reading about. So now I'm going to have to be fact-checked. Right. So that's embarrassing. Okay. Anyway, but thank you for being here. It's really yeah, well, it's really exciting that you're here, actually. Okay, so this is in the middle of a chapter in the middle of the book, and it doesn't really matter. You don't need to know anything. Sam invented a subway game for us to play. I closed my eyes, and he called off the stations as we pulled into them. I got the first few right: Broadway, South Station. So Sam thought of a way to make the game harder. He told me to keep track of the stations in my head and wait until he asked where we were. I kept my hands over my eyes and counted the train's lurching starts and stops. Each time the doors sighed open, I visualized the platform. Washington, Park. I counted stations and waited for him to ask. Okay, he said finally, where are we? I'd lost count. I wasn't even sure if we'd crossed the Charles River into Cambridge. It starts with a C, he hinted. Kendall. No, that's a K. I give up, I said. Come on, he said, guess. He hated it when I gave up. It was usually my way of getting out of something he was winning at. But I really couldn't think of a stop on the red line that started with C. Okay, he said, relenting. Central. That starts with an S, I said. But I looked, and he was right. I remember the game because it's how I learned about soft C. Sam and I were 7 and 6, riding the red line home from school in dirty sweatshirts and corduroys with the knees ripped out. Sam's hair was as long as mine, but blonder. He wore horn-rimmed glasses that made him look like a little campus radical. We got off the subway at the end of the line and rode up the wooden escalator, a conveyor belt so steep I had to hold the railing to keep from sliding backwards. The belt was made up of interlocking sections that sprang up like teeth at the top and disappeared under the floor. We emerged from the kiosk in the center of Harvard Square and crossed the street to loiter over the candy racks at Nini's corner store before using our transfers for the bus ride home. The green North Cambridge bus ran up Mass Ave to my mother's apartment. The orange Huron Ave bus circled the Cambridge Common and turned up Garden Street toward my father's house and points west. They were old, round, loaf-shaped electric buses with spider-leg contraptions on the top that shrieked and sparked and came unhooked from the overhead wires on sharp turns. The driver would get out, cursing, and wrestle them back into place. I'd been riding the bus by myself since I was 5. Once I was taken back to the MBTA garage by a driver who decided I was lost. I fumed in the office until my mother came and picked me up. Sam, Nate, and I all went to Warehouse Cooperative School. It was an educational experiment in the tradition of Summerhill, a school founded in the 1920s by the educator A.S. Neal, whose philosophy called for the elimination of every possible form of dictate or coercion from the process of educating children. I began kindergarten at the local public school, but I started going to Warehouse with Sam more or less on my own volition. The school was in its first space then, the basement of a church in Watertown. I officially enrolled the next year when they moved to an actual warehouse on the second floor of a screw factory in an industrial section of Roxbury. Usually Sam and I commuted to school together. If we hadn't stayed at the same place the previous night, my mother's apartment or my father's house, We met in Harvard Square and took the Red Line to the Savin Hill station in Dorchester, then transferred to a bus and disembarked at the massive soot-covered Old Mr. Boston Distillery on Mass Ave, half a block from the school. Or else we got off at Andrew and followed the freight tracks for half a mile, walking the rails like balance beams, or stretching out our strides so that each footfall landed on a railroad tie. From the tracks, we cut through an alley past the Colonial Meats plant, where rack after rack of skinned carcasses lined the loading docks. In the men's room at the Harvard Square subway station, Sam had discovered a cache of transfer booklets that were being used as toilet paper by the MBTA employees. Punched in the right spot, each transfer was good for a free subway ride, meaning that he could get on and off the subway as often as he wanted. He set a goal to go to every stop on the T, and sometimes I tagged along. We rode the new Red Line extension all the way out to Quincy Center. We descended the stairs from the elevated Orange Line at the Dudley station and explored the blocks around the bus garage where the Mass Ave bus terminated. The Blue Line was the most exotic. The cars were wooden, and the station names had special romance. Maverick, Wonderland, Orient Heights. Sometimes we didn't get to school until afternoon, but it didn't matter because there was no official school hours. Attendance was kept on a sign-in sheet next to a bulletin board where the menu of instructional offerings was posted. Math, Utopia, woodshop. One popular class was called Food. The teacher was a botanist who published a book called Growing Marijuana in New England and Other Cold Climates under the pen name Peter Oakham. He would bring a vegetable or an egg or some other edible thing to be dissected and studied and then consumed. Once he took the class to the Colonial Meats pack house next door, where men in coveralls were lobbing great chunks of animal product into a vat with snow shovels. This was extruded into condoms, sectioned off into hot dogs, and eaten with gusto at the end of the tour. For the younger children, there was a carpeted area with a box of early readers to rummage through. Older students participated in hitchhiking contests, in which students were dropped off at various points on the outskirts of the city to race back to the warehouse. The one truly school-wide activity was the afternoon ritual of milk and cookies. Everyone from kindergartners to 18-year-olds in Army surplus jackets would form an orderly line and file through the office. Someone's father, an architect, came up with the idea for spaces, plywood boxes about 5 feet cubed, constructed with donated materials and arranged like a honeycomb in the vast hangar-like area at the center of the warehouse. Kids personalized them with posters, bead curtains, and purloined road signs. They moved them into clusters, cut pass-through doors in the walls to create super spaces, and stacked them into high-rises, from the tops of which they could grab onto the industrial hooks that ran on a track across the ceiling and ride them like a zip line. Sam asked me recently if I remembered some giant wooden vats in the corner of the warehouse, one of them oozing something that tasted like cough syrup. I came upon a mob of kids once, swarming a room where a cooking class was being held. A rumor of cookies or brownies had circulated, and everyone was trying to get inside. Someone slammed the heavy industrial door. There was a shriek, and the crowds parted. One of the little kids had gotten the tip of his pinky severed. He looked straight at me, and I turned around and ran. Some instinct caused him to chase me, screaming, blood spurting like a fountain and throbbing with his heartbeat. The smell of it was sick, sweet, metallic. A child is innately wise and realistic, according to A.S. Neal. If left to himself without adult suggestion of any kind, he will develop as far as he's capable of developing. Warehouse was a reflection of its time. Ideas that now sound naive and sentimental, even a little insane, were considered enlightened. The utopian vision of a leaderless self-schooling from the 1920s had been absorbed and reshaped by the radical culture of the 60s and emerged with a harder edge. Freedom begot anarchy, and anarchy sometimes begot chaos. The industrial hooks, trash-blown stretches of emptiness, and rows of bloody carcasses were preordained. Even the fact that the school had been named Warehouse before there was a warehouse suggested a fetishization of extremes, a premonition of the ruin porn of later decades. My first progress report is an impressionistic 2-page account of how I spent my time, mostly in the carpeted little kids area, or the art room, which had a pottery wheel and an oven for copper enameling. Mimi has a certain naivete, it says, that caused one staff member to compare her to a kitten in the middle of a freeway. The report was signed by someone named Lynn Hodgman, who had apparently been my advisor. I do not remember this person. Seeing her name was a little jarring, to learn that someone had been observing me. Now, I'm going to finish this with a coda from a recent coda, which is that I was recently at a Macedonian folk dancing event, as one does in Cambridge to this day. And my sister pointed out there was like a big ring of like kind of now sort of elderly people like shuffling around in a Balkan circle, you know, and my sister pointed to one of them and said, "That's Lynn Hodgman. She was your advisor at Warehouse." So I went up, I found her later and I introduced myself to her and I said, "I'm Mimi. I was, you know, I was one of the little kids at Warehouse when you were a teacher there." And she said, "I'm sorry. We were all very young." So that's the coda, and David can tell me what I got wrong later, but not right now. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to read is, it's a little essay that's in this, do you know what Metrograph is? It's like, yeah, it's a cinema it's a wonderful new cinema in Chinatown. And they put out these catalogs, which are like really classy affairs. They're not even catalogs. They're like, yeah. And so I was asked to contribute an essay to one of them. So this is what I sent in. It's called "I Am American Cowboy Jim." Little Vanya says, "I am American Cowboy Jim, and this is my talking horse, Waldorf. All day long, we ride and smoke. That is, I smoke. As is well known, horses don't smoke. In the evening, we sit in the Arizona desert and play the guitar. We especially like songs about life in the Arizona desert. I respect my horse Waldorf, and as far as I know, he respects me." This is from a translation exercise in A Russian Course, a textbook written by my father, Alexander Lipson. In the same exercise, little Sasha says, "I am Arabian Prince Abdul, and these are my dear wives." Little Sonia is a doctor of all the sciences. The leading professors repeat everything she says. For instance, yesterday I said, "Mathematics is the queen of the sciences." Today, all the leading professors repeat, "Mathematics is the queen of all the sciences." My father died in 1980 at the age of 51, but his name retains currency in the shrinking world of 20th century Slavophiles, in large part because of this odd, lively textbook, its lessons dictated by shock workers and hooligans, trolley car drivers, mushroom pickers, lovelorn janitors, and such recurring characters as Comrade Borodin and the famous Professor Schultz. It is Richard Scarry meets F.V. Gladkov. What does any of this have to do with cinema? Well, a Russian course is full of types and role-playing and pretending, character actors in cowboy drag. My father loved going to the movies. And my brother Sam and I were his usual dates. We lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, walking distance from the repertory houses in Harvard Square, biking distance from half a dozen single-screen neighborhood theaters of the sort that have now been divided into multiplexes. My first understanding of the large people on the large screen was probably that they too were projections of my father's mind. He loved Hollywood tough guys like Clint Eastwood. He loved Charles Bronson more because Bronson was not just a tough guy, but also Polish-American. Of the small screen tough guys, Kojak was his favorite. He took us to see Telly Savalas in Killer Force twice. Twice we saw Savalas chase Peter Fonda, O.J. Simpson, and the other diamond thieves through the Kalahari by helicopter. Twice, bewilderingly, he ripped Maude Adams's wraparound skirt from her waist before stalking off camera. This was at the Somerville Theater in Davis Square. A child's ticket and a tub of popcorn each cost 25 cents, though we never bought popcorn. I remember my father showing up at school in the middle of the day to take us to the movies. This is after we left Warehouse, or Warehouse imploded. I think of it as a regular occurrence, though maybe it only happened a few times. We'd be called to the office where Dad was chatting up the principal. Ready for your dentist appointment, kids? I have a specific memory of the three of us getting on his bicycle, Sam on the rear rack and me on the crossbar, and riding to the Somerville Theater to see The Strongest Man in the World. Maybe the occasion stands out because the Disney picture was an unusual choice for my father. In general, we saw the movies that appealed to him. His tastes were Catholic. He liked westerns, police procedurals, and cast of thousands disaster movies such as The Poseidon Adventure or Airport. Or an afternoon at the movies might mean suffering through Wild Strawberries. When Sam was 9 or 10 years old, Dad took him downtown on the T to see a Swedish art film, which turned out to be hardcore pornography. They left when the heavy action started. Around the same time, they went to see Last Tango in Paris and stayed until the end. Afterwards, their mutual embarrassment took some time to wear off. What is life? What are people? People are ants, and life is an anthill. In what does life end? Life ends in zero, a Russian course. The Brattle Theater in Harvard Square was where my father went, as often as not, to indulge his taste for Middle European gloom. Sometime in the late 70s, they ran a weekly Fassbinder series. And for 10 weeks or so, he and Sam went to a Fassbinder double feature every Wednesday. I wasn't living with my father at the time, so I missed a lot of them. I only remember seeing Fox and His Friends, The Marriage of Maria Braun, and Why Does Herr R. Run Amok? I would have been 12 or 13 then, and I didn't understand much about these films. I thought of Herr R. only as slapstick comedy until I saw it again decades later. I remembered Kurt Rob's character appearing behind the neighbor as she sat on the sofa, nattering about her new skiing outfit, and bringing a heavy object, which I remembered as a frying pan, down on her head. I'd forgotten that he murders his family. I experienced Fox and His Friends then as a slow-moving bummer with a surly and unattractive protagonist, and Maria Braun seemed like a cinematic soap opera. It would be some time before I could begin to feel the weight of history in it. Now, remembering the volumes of Holocaust literature on my father's bookshelves, I wish I could go back and watch it with him again. I think, though I'm not sure, that by the time of the Fassbinder series, my father had already received a cancer diagnosis, had a kidney removed and been declared in remission. He was hospitalized again in January 1980, at the old Peter Bent Brigham, the model hospital, the model, I'm told, for the television show St. Elsewhere. He occupied the last bed in an open ward, which meant he had a window, which gave him the opportunity to act out the death scene from Dark Victory. "Look how it's clouding up," he said, in the character of a devastatingly chipper Betty Davis. "It's getting darker every second." The last movie he saw was Norma Ray, which we took him to at the Somerville Theater one last time that spring. We took him to the Somerville Theater one last time that spring. And by then the play acting was over. He was a bald, sunken-eyed wraith, and he couldn't have weighed more than 85 pounds. His mind was mostly gone. It's hard to know what he made of the film, but he cried unabashedly at the end when the union activist from New York City says goodbye to Sally Field. Where are the forget-me-nots of last week? They blossomed, and now have all disappeared. A Russian course.